And so welcome to everybody. We're really pleased that you've joined us tonight. My name is Juliet Merrifield. I'm part of the HKD transition group, and I'm here with my colleagues Alastair Whitby and Rob Swaby, who are going to talk about flooding in Hassocks. And what we're going to do is I'm going to share my screen initially. We've got some slides to show you, and then I'll hand over to Rob and then to Alastair. So there will be a little technical handover going on along the way. So I'm going to start from right here. So what we're going to talk about tonight, if I can get this to work, is flooding and the future, but we're also going to talk a bit about the past. So we're looking backwards and we're looking forwards. And I'm going to do the first bit and to talk about what causes flooding in Hassocks. Then I'm going to hand over to Rob, who's going to show you some maps and some very clever interactive maps that show where the areas of flood risk are and some of the historical reasons behind those areas of flood risk. Then we're handing over to Alastair, who's going to talk you through some of the things that we've done already with natural flood management, which is using natural processes to reduce the risk of stream flooding, and through sustainable drainage systems, which is managing surface water runoff. And finally, we're going to talk about what more could be done with more support, more people, more funding, and some just getting the community together to do some things. So that's what we're going to do tonight. First of all, something about the Floods and SuDS group. So we're a partnership between HKD Transition and the Hassocks Community Organisation. We've been working on floods and SuDS since 2015, and we've had a lot of support from the Oodnadatta Rivers Trust. I think I can safely say that when we started, none of us knew very much about flooding, and we've learned a huge amount from working with the Oodnadatta Rivers Trust and working on these projects. Fred Malladay has been an important part of the group since the beginning and represents the Hassocks Community Organisation. He's now got more of a watching brief, but he's keeping a pretty close eye on us. And a lot of the things that you hear about tonight are going to be things that Fred has helped work on. And it all started because of Margaret Ford, who's also with us tonight, who was chair of the Hassocks Amenity Association. And as part of the repair of the Spittleford Bridge, which was a major project that HAA worked on, she invited HKD Transition to get involved in replanting the stream bed, the bank next to the URC church, which was getting really badly eroded. So we got some help with plants from the Sussex Wildlife Trust, and they brought in Peter King from the Oodnadatta Rivers Trust, who started talking to us about flooding. And we were rather amazed to find that there was somebody who had so much expertise about flooding, and that there were some things that we could do as a community group. So we've had a number of small projects over the last 5 years. We've had some small grants from West Sussex County Council's Operation Watershed and from Hassocks Parish Council. And we've had projects with Downland School, with Hassocks Infant School, the URC Church, Hassocks Parish Council, and Adastra Hall. And we've built some debris dams in Lag Wood with the support of the owners of Lag Wood. And you'll be hearing about all of those projects when Alastair gets started. So if you don't live on one of the roads that has a stream running down at the back of the gardens, it would be quite easy to miss stream flooding in Hassocks. I'd lived in Hassocks for several years before I realised that there were streams that came through Hassocks. I'm sure I walked over Spittleford Bridge hundreds of times before I really paid attention to the fact that there was a stream underneath it. And I didn't know about many of the others because a lot of them run in culverts underground, or they're behind people's gardens and you don't see them. But there are a lot of streams in Hassocks, and sometimes, as in here, they overflow their banks. So the photo on the left is from 2003. It's taken from Lodge Lane. There's a stream that comes into Lodge Lane right next to that house. It's supposed to flow through a culvert underneath the road, but here it is pouring over the top and across the road. The photo on the right is Dale Avenue, where the water just starts flowing down Dale Avenue. And you can actually see right here, there's water coming up out of the drain. So this is Spittleford Bridge with the water pretty high, and you can see that this is going to be one of the issues, and we'll come back to the role of these pinch points like Spittleford Bridge. This was in 2012, and you can see that the water almost fills the arches. Not a bit more water coming down the stream, and we'll have to start backing up and going someplace else because there's no place for it to go. The quotes on the left are from people who live in Hassocks who came together when we had a flood mapping day in 2017. And they were talking about their experiences with flooding. Whenever it always floods our part of the village because once the stream is full, the land drains don't work. The road floods 5-6 times a year whenever we have torrential rain. I've lived in Hassocks about 10 years and my garden has flooded about 3 times since we've been here. When it rains heavily, we see the water flowing past our house, which is half the width of the road, and a good stream going past. It's coming downhill there and the drainage system just can't cope with that. So what's the problem and why is flooding an issue in Hassocks? So there's 3 things that come together to create the problem. One is the streams that flow out of the downs and through the village. The second is the surface water that runs off roofs, driveways, car parks, roads, all the hard surfaces. And the third is the effect of climate change and global heating on rainfall. So let's start with the streams. So here's a topographical map of the South Downs National Park, and you can see the line of the downs, the high ground. You can see where the river Ouse flows through Lewis. You've got a lot of low ground, potential for flooding. Over on this side, you've got the Ader running through, and again, the blue areas signify low ground that's prone to flooding. And if I can get this a little bit bigger, you can see where Hassocks is on the railway line. You can see that Ditchling was built on a little rise. Westmeston's a bit higher, Clayton's a bit higher. The old part of Hurstpierpoint is on a bit of a ridge. But Hassocks is pale blue, which is about 100 feet above sea level. So it's quite low. Before the railway came through and Hassocks was built, most of the area was waterlogged for a lot of the year. And Sussex as a whole was known as a very wet county. And sometimes villages that were built on the higher ground were cut off from the rest of the county for parts of the year because the clay was so heavy, you just couldn't get through. So at the root of the problem, most of Hassocks was built on a floodplain. So the main stream through the village is the Herring Stream, but as we'll see when Rob shows us the maps, there are actually 7 streams that flow from the downs through Hassocks. So flooding from streams. The chalk under the downs is really good at holding water, but when it's saturated, any new rainfall just runs off quickly through the springs and into the streams. The water level in the streams in the village can rise from just a few inches to several feet in the course of a few hours, and then drop again quite quickly. But that peak causes the problem when the streams overflow their banks. And then pinch points like Spittleford Bridge and Waters Meet, where the stream flows under the railway, narrow the flow of water through the stream and can't handle heavy flow down from the downs. When there was open countryside before Hassocks was built, the streams could overrun their banks and there was marshland and wetland to absorb the water. But then we built homes and roads on that marshland. So now when the streams overtop their banks, they flood gardens and roads and even houses. So that's the problem with the streams. In addition to that, we've got problems with surface water. So again, before Hassocks was built, rainfall got absorbed into the soil, into plants, into trees. But now when it rains, the water runs off hard surfaces, and we've got a lot of hard surfaces, roofs, driveways, roads, car parks. It flows off those hard surfaces into the surface water drain system, which takes the runoff straight to the nearest stream. So you will have noticed that that's adding to the water levels in the stream and adding to the potential for stream flooding. But beyond that, the drainage system was built a lot of years ago to handle what was then normal flood events. But those flood events that might have been 1 in 30 years in the past are getting a lot more frequent, and we need to be prepared for even higher rainfall in the future. So climate change changes everything. We're looking at global heating, and we're seeing those changes in our lifetimes. I thought it was going to be our grandchildren that would feel the effects of climate change, but actually we're seeing the changes happening already. The increases in average global temperatures that we've seen already are increasing the intensity of rainfall events. Projections are quite difficult to make, but the Committee on Climate Change estimates that by the middle of this century, we're very likely to see a 10% increase in heavy rainfall from today's levels. And by the end of the century, it could be 20% higher than it is now, even if we keep global heating well below 2 degrees centigrade. And it could be 50 to 70% higher if we're not successful in doing that. The Met Office thinks that we're likely to have wetter winters and drier summers, but can also have summer flash flooding, where you have torrential downpours from thunderstorms that cause roads to flood particularly. All of that means more water in the streams, especially in winter, more water in the roads at any time of the year, and more flooding. So I'm handing over to Rob now to look at some maps, which are going to be pretty fascinating. Rob, I'm stopping my share and handing over.
Good evening. Thank you, Juliet. Hopefully you can all hear me. Thank you, Alistair. So I'm the newest member of the flooding team, and my background is working for an environmental consultancy down in Brighton, specifically working with maps and with spatial data, more historically around contaminated land, but touching a little bit on Hassocks on a sort of wider national level. So I moved to Hassocks about 3 years ago, to a house with the stream at the bottom of the garden. So when I heard about the HKD group and the flooding group specifically, I was obviously keen to find out more about what they were doing and the historic flooding that had happened in the village, and see if I could offer assistance at all. So I met up with Juliet and Alistair on one of the stream walks that was sort of presented by Peter King, and it was fascinating. So if you do get a chance to do one of those again in the future, I'd really encourage people to go along and have a listen. And yeah, met these guys, and it's been really interesting to see the fantastic work that's already been done, and hopefully that I can help progress how we analyze the flooding and what we can do in the future through the use of GIS and maps on computers. So this evening, what I'm going to do is run through some of the flooding data sets that are readily available, and show you how we can use GIS to visualize the different types of flooding around mainly Hassocks this evening, but we'll look a little bit about at Hurstpit Point and Ditchling as well. So first we'll look a little bit about the flooding from from rivers and streams that Juliet talked about to start with. Then we'll look a little bit, again, we'll move on to surface water flooding and look at some of the differences there. We'll then touch briefly on groundwater flooding, and then we'll look at some historic maps and demonstrate how we can potentially use GIS to look at why there might be flooding in specific locations. So I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully you'll be able to see a map of Hassocks. All right, if you could just give me a nod if you can see. Excellent. So hopefully you can see the map, and you can see here we have Hassocks Station, And this is it's quite a reasonably detailed map of the houses in Hassocks. So the program that I'm using this evening is called QGIS. This is an open source piece of software, which means anyone can download this, and you can do some pretty powerful analysis using this. It's a bit complicated to get started, but anyone can do it. So a geographic information system, or a GIS, is pretty much like having Google Maps at your fingertips, but being able to add extra information, spatial data, which you can layer on top of the background mapping. And then you can use the power of the GIS to do some quite advanced analysis using the data, things like measuring distances, doing buffers, even looking at where the shadows will fall for buildings. It's a really powerful tool. So hopefully you can see this is Hassocks, and I can turn off the background mapping and put on some other types of background mapping, including aerial imagery, really easily. So it gives us some good background mapping. And the first thing I'm going to layer on top of this background mapping is the Environment Agency's Flood Zone 2 data. So this model is specifically looking at what type of flooding you might get if the stream was full to the brim and overflowing. It's designed specifically to support flood risk assessments for when people are putting in planning applications, and it's also to make people aware of the likelihood of flooding in areas that they live and work in, and encourage people to find out more and to take appropriate action. So this is a freely available government model, and it covers the whole of the UK. So as we can expect from this data set, that it's based around river flooding, you can see that it follows the line of the streams that flow through Hassocks. And if we just nip over to Hurstpit Point, you can see that the only real major stream is this one to the south of the village, and there's not much in Ditchling. So like all of the models that we're going to look at this evening, this data is based on model data. So this means it's not an indication that a property or a piece of land is going to flood, but that there is a risk of flooding in the area. So if your house is one of the houses in these flood risks, and you might realize that actually your house doesn't flood, but this is taken, this is a model that is done for the whole of the UK. So it won't ever really take in the idiosyncrasies of our local topography and how we know that the flooding water might manifest itself in our area. So this gives us a basic outline. We can also then have a look at it in a little more detail. And this is another data set called ROFRAS. And this allows us to look at the different parts of the floodplain that are more severe. So obviously the red areas show where you can get more severe flooding, and the light blue is where it is less likely or less severe to happen. Okay, so the next data set that I'm gonna, actually, if we just look quickly at where the flooding seems to be the highest, it's around, again, these pinch points that Juliet spoke about. So Spitalfields Bridge, you've got the effect of a number of different streams joining, and that is in a sort of depression within the village. And then up at Watersmeet, where there is a culvert that runs underneath the railway bridge. You could expect if that was blocked up, then you would get some severe flooding around there. So that's the flooding from rivers. Now we'll switch over and have a look at the surface water flooding. So this is looking at surface water, also called pluvial flooding. And this occurs when extremely heavy downpours of rain saturate the drainage systems and the soil, and the excess of water can't be absorbed by the sort of standard ways. This data itself comes from a company called Ambiental. Ambiental runs some very complex nationwide models where they actually take a 5-meter grid every point in the UK, and then sort of simulate what would happen if they were to flood that 5-meter grid with water, and how each 5-meter grid would interact with those around it, taking into account the type of surface that it's on, the topography, and any streams, and lots of other things that I don't know enough about. Again, we can see that it pretty much follows the streams, and this is naturally because of the depressions and the topography around Hassocks will naturally mean that these areas will tend to fill up the quickest, which is pretty much why there are streams there in the first place. But it is to me, it's very interesting that there is such a high effect around water's meet in comparison to the flood zone 2 data. And this would be interesting for me to sort of further investigate whether the culvert has been accounted for in this model or not. But I'm interested to analyze this data in a little more detail. And one of the things about having this data is, again, it's on a national level. So the company that create this might not know that the culvert there is of a certain width and a depth, but if we can add that type of local knowledge into the models that are already there, hopefully we can come up with some better predictions. So the last bit of data that we're going to have a look at is groundwater. So groundwater flooding is almost like the forgotten type of flooding, because often the cause of the flooding may not happen where the flooding actually occurs. So you might have a huge amount of rainfall happening upstream, and that will work its way through the water table and affect houses that are effectively miles away from where the actual occurrence of this water happened. So the groundwater risk model takes into account a lot more information about the geology, so the superficial geology around Hassocks, and the aquifer types around. So it looks a bit more scary. That's because it covers everywhere rather than just the areas that are at high risk. But you can see there's a considerable amount in this model of Hassocks that is at high risk from groundwater flooding. And if you walk around Hassocks when it's been very wet, I think we all know that our gardens get very, very soggy, and it takes a while for the water to drain away, especially down around the streams. And this is why, because of the groundwater, the risk of groundwater flooding. So those are the kind of the 3 different types of data that are available for flood risk. And as you can see, it's quite a complex thing that happens. You have all of these different types of flooding that can all occur, and if they were all to happen at the same time in the same place, that could then create a very severe flood. And as Juliet said, with the climate change and the fact that we're expecting more extreme events to happen, then flooding is only going to get worse, and we need to be in a better position to tackle that. So then the next thing I was going to have a look at, if I've still got time, I'm looking at you, Alistair. Yep, lovely. Is just have a quick look at some historic maps. So I'm going to turn some maps on, and we're going to have a look over in Kemah. So we know from experience that there is often a flood that forms on the road to Ditchling at the end of Beaconhurst. We see that quite regularly occurring. And when we were looking through some historic maps, we noticed that in a number of the maps, we see that there was previously a pond right at the entrance here. So one of the interesting things is, would that flooding still occur if the pond was there? Would that water naturally have formed that pond during the wetter periods and stopped the road being flooded. And also what I noticed is if we look at the groundwater flooding, right at the point where it floods, there is very high indication of groundwater flooding this at the point where it floods. So this, again, is a question rather than an answer, but it's saying, is this model something that is predicting the flooding there, or is it just purely because of the topography and the fact that the road dips down? It could even be to do with the fact that a drain doesn't work. However, the fact that there's evidence that there used to be a pond in this exact location really lets us speculate about why there is flooding there currently. So as you can see, there's an awful lot of power that we can use, and using GIS, we've just sort of begun on and basically just visualizing potential risk at the moment. But there are lots of opportunities in other areas of the county. We've seen where GIS desktop studies have been undertaken to help indicate where we could plant trees or put in different mitigation processes to help us reduce flooding. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview of the flooding in Hassocks, where it is, where the risk is, where the data is showing it can be, and an idea of how we might be able to use that a bit more in the future. So I'll hand over to Adastra now, so he can talk a little bit about what we've already done to try and mitigate some of this flooding.
Super. Yeah, thank you both. Let me just get the slide up. Can everybody see that now? Rob, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Super. So yes, I'm going to be talking now about some of the solutions, some of what we've already managed to do. Obviously, Juliet mentioned that a lot of these have been in partnership with the Usenode River Trust and the Hassocks Parish Council and other groups. So it's certainly not all us, but we've certainly managed to do quite a few things in Hassocks, and they're definitely worth celebrating, with a view to wanting to do more of these in the future. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to call this meeting, to kind of harvest the knowledge in the community and to figure out what we can do next. But before I launch in, I thought it would be good to have a look at some terms so that we have been using and we will be using this evening. So natural flood management and sustainable drainage systems. Natural flood management is using natural processes to reduce the risk of flooding. Examples include restoring bends in rivers. Obviously, this increases capacity, changing the way that land is managed so soil can absorb more water, infiltration. This is increasing the soil's ability to take more water, and typically planting trees or hedgerows or things that allow the water to filter into the soil really help with that absorption. Creating seasonal ponds, which increases storage, and installing things like debris dams, which have a great capacity to slow the flow of water. So there's another very related topic, but in the urban setting, called sustainable drainage systems. And these approaches manage surface water that take account of water quantity, flooding, water quality, pollution, biodiversity, wildlife and plants, and amenity. They help make the places that we live better places to live. And yeah, these, rather than the kind of the old drainage approach of trying to convey water away as quickly as possible by kind of dredging or widening of streams, which as I think most of us probably know, just often shunts the problem elsewhere downstream. These kind of systems, particularly SuDS, attempt to mimic nature and natural systems, and definitely natural flood management mimics these natural systems as well. They try to manage water very close to where it's falling, again, rather than shunting the problem down the river, and are considered to be environmentally beneficial. So whereas dredging and hard engineering often can have devastating effects on ecology, these kind of systems are seen to be beneficial to the environment. So those of you who either live or visit Hassocks often may have seen this interpretation board in Adastra Park, and I thought I'd just show this interpretation board this evening because it does show, it illustrates nicely the kind of range of different NFM and SuDS interventions that have happened all around Hassocks. So there are multiple Rainbox planters at the United Reformed Church, at Hassocks Infants School, Downlands, the Hassocks Parish Council buildings, Adastra Hall. There's the rain garden itself in Adastra Park, and I'll be talking about all of these different things in a little more detail in a second. And also the woody debris dams and natural flood management interventions in Butcher's Wood and Lagwood. So this is on the left a kind of an illustration of what a rain garden is attempting to do, and on the right you can actually see the Adastra rain garden being constructed, and this is obviously designed to take rainwater from the roof in Adastra on Adastra Hall and store it temporarily in two shallow hollows with a meander in between, and the water here soaks slowly away into the ground, avoiding those peak flows into the surface water drainage system and the herring stream that we've been talking about. So you can see some of our fabulous volunteers doing the planting of the scheme after the meanders had been created, and on the right hand side what it looks like in its bloom, as it were, and again you can see here that it's having multiple functions. As well as alleviating flooding, it's also providing habitats here and food for pollinators. So that's one of the key concepts here, and this is what it looks like after a heavy rainfall event. So these two pools either side fill up with water, the water that otherwise would be rushing into the surface water system, and very gently and slowly drains away over the course of a couple of days. So we've also been installing Rainbox planters all around Hassocks. These are the ones at Hassocks Infants. I think there are 7 or 8 of these at Hassocks Infants. And Rainbox planters are another really useful SuDS intervention. So these Rainbox planters are designed to interrupt the flow of water from roofs again, much in the same way as the rain gardens, but these ones fill up the planters. You can see on the left-hand side is a kind of cross-section of one of these planters, and they're designed to fill right up to the top and then again slowly drain away from that. There's a pipe at the bottom that you can see has got the kind of narrow slits in it. If it fills up and it needs to overtop, it can also overtop into that kind of the pipe that's kind of running up and connected to the stormwater drain. But essentially these are capturing certain volumes of water and releasing it slowly. So and again, great for biodiversity. You should see these in the summertime and the spring, whenever the flowers are blooming. These are absolutely covered in pollinators and are providing cool green areas in otherwise very kind of heavy concrete tarmac type areas. So multiple functions. Here's another one of the Rainbox planters on the Adastra Buildings. So this is a kind of before and after series that shows the planters, again, interrupting surface water to drain away slowly. And the key thing with all of these interventions is that they help to desynchronize the peak flow of water, so that flood peaks are leveled out. So they're helping to make sure that the water doesn't all meet the pinch points that we have mentioned, Spitalfield Bridge, the railway culvert, at the same time. These bottlenecks are some of the key concerns for flooding in Hassocks. And if we can make sure that the water, wherever it can be captured and slowed, is captured and slowed, then it will meet these key pinch points at different times. So again, here's some Rainbox planters at the Downland School. And again, with these interventions, obviously one Rainbox planter itself is not going to tackle the flooding, but when you have many interventions, you know, and these include green roofs and water butts and rain gardens and Rainbox planters, and we will come to the slightly bigger natural flood management interventions in Lag Wood, they start to have a real impact. So yes, debris dams. Again, these have really multiple functions. They help to store and slow water. They release it gradually after rainfall. They also provide habitat for fish by creating pools and cover. And I was once told by somebody that fish really do grow in trees. They do need this cover, and small fish fry use tree cover and branches and woody debris in streams to survive and thrive. So it's really important habitat for fish, and also lots of microhabitats are created by other aquatic organisms that the fish feed on. So they're actually very beneficial. And of course, you know, beavers have been creating these types of systems for millennia. They also create a variety of velocities within stream systems, slowing it down and then increasing it, which oxygenates the water. So lots of benefits. And they regulate the climate by storing carbon and mitigating drought and cooling stream water. And we can see these interventions in Lag Wood in action, as it were. So on the left is, again, our wonderful volunteers helping to create some of these debris dams in Lag Wood, this autumn gone. And then this is only a few weeks later, after Storm Bella dropped a heck of a lot of water in December, and it is doing its job. You know, as you can see, a huge volume of water is being held and slowly released. One of the key things that needs to happen with these debris dams is you need to create a series of them, and we've got 5 big ones in Lag Wood that are installed that just help in a series to slow that water and hold it back. And again, here we have some of our volunteers making it and what it looked like after a huge rainfall event. So yeah, these are perfect for kind of desynchronizing large amounts of water so that they don't reach the pinch points all at once. So at the end of our presentation, we would love to hear a bit more about some of the interventions that you think are necessary and possible around Hassocks. But for the moment, I'm going to hand back to Juliet to give us the final section of our presentation.
Yes, we're coming towards the end. So if you've got questions or thoughts, comments, ideas for priority areas that we should be working on, ideas of things that we could be doing, please will you use the chat function to just flag some things up, and then we can talk through that once we've got to the end of the formal bit. But we're very keen to hear your ideas and your thoughts about where we go from here. So what more could be done? So you've seen some of the things we've done already. Our feeling is that, I guess the key takeaway from this evening that we would like you to feel is that flooding is a serious issue in Hassocks and going to be more serious in the future. but there's a lot that could be done to make Hassocks more resilient to flooding in the future. So, and I like your term, Alistair, desynchronize flood peaks, because that seems like that's a key part of what could be done, and could be done without major engineering work, but could be done as community projects and small things that people can do themselves. So we could, for example, do more natural flood management upstream from the village. There are 7 tributaries. We've only done work on debris dams on 1 of them so far. So there's scope for doing more. We could have more debris dams in the streams. We could have seasonal ponds that just allow the streams to overflow in winter when there's a lot of water in the streams and dry out in the summer. That's the way things used to be before we built a lot of houses. And there's scope for doing more of these kinds of things. More trees and hedges, keeping green spaces open, doing less paving over of spaces would help the soil absorb more rain as it falls and keep the rainfall out of the streams. Within the village itself, there's things that we could do to retain the water running off from hard surfaces, and so reducing flash flooding. So trees, hedges, keeping green spaces open, all would help the soil absorb more rain instead of paving spaces. Green roofs on sheds, garages, and houses would slow runoff from roofs into the drainage systems. Rainbox planters, rain gardens, all of them would catch rain running off roofs and slowly release it. It's about transforming the streetscape to retain water from the roads and the car parks. We can't unmake the roads and car parks. We could make, as they get resurfaced, they could be more permeable than they are. But there's a lot that we could do to retain the water and to slow it down from flowing into the streams and from overflowing across the roads. And we need them all. Oh, yep, that's the next slide. Each of those projects is a small part of the solution. They only hold a few cubic feet of water, mostly. On its own, no single project is going to get us there, but added across lots of projects, you can have an impact. And it reminds me of one of my favorite songs of Pete Seeger called Step by Step. And he talks in the song, there's a line about many stones can form an arch, singly none. And drops of water turn a mill, singly none. These drops of water on their own that we're able to store just a few cubic feet on its own doesn't make a difference, but add them together and we can have an impact. There are constraints. So I think one of the biggest ones is for people to know that what they can do in their own homes and gardens can make a difference. So small projects can make a difference. Lots of people are not aware of that. Just when you're repaving your driveway, making sure that it's permeable, putting in a Rainbox planter, having a pond in your garden, all of those are small things, but if lots of people did them, it could make a difference. When it comes to community projects, things that we can do together, it takes time and initiative and effort for those to happen. They don't just make themselves happen. And so we need people to get involved in making things happen. It can be hard to get landowners' consent for bigger projects, particularly the upstream from the village. And I'll come back to the ELMS, the environmental land management, which may provide some answers to some of that. Larger community projects like building ponds and so on need funding. There are lots of very low cost things that we can do, but there are some things that do need some more money to go in. And most of all, we need volunteers to organize projects as well as practical help with tree planting and debris dam making and so on. All of that is needed in order to be able to really have an impact. So there are constraints, but in the next slide, there are also opportunities. There's lots of things that could be done. We could have rapid response teams of neighborhood volunteers who can respond quickly to flooding, clear out drains, remove obstacles from streams, helping property owners who have property through which the stream flows. And we've got a small team already formed around Parklands Road who have already started working on those kinds of things. If people would like to have Rainbox planters for the downspouts from their roofs, or maybe people need help in building them, the material costs are quite small, but you have to be able to saw up the wood and screw it together. So maybe there could be teams of volunteers who can help each other make Rainbox planters. On a bigger scale, the government is currently trialing environmental land management schemes, ELMs, and these would pay landowners for public goods on their land, including flood mitigation and creating wildlife habitats and so on. It's not going to come in until 2024, and we don't yet know exactly how it's going to work, but it's a potentially something that would mean that farmers who've got a waterlogged area in a field that isn't much use for anything else might actually get some funding to create a seasonal pond there that would help take some of the water from a stream and stop it from reaching the village. So the Floods and SuDS team would love to have some new members to help identify specific opportunities, projects around Hassocks that would reduce flood risk. And we would welcome you to get in touch with us. You can email us at herring@hkdtransition.org.uk, or you could have a look on our website. And that's it, I think. Over to you, Alistair.
Super. So thank you for that, Julia. So I can see that there are a number of questions in the chat, and I think probably the simplest way is for people to unmute themselves in a second and maybe ask their question, and then we can have a discussion about it. But just chatting in the team before the call, we did kind of come up with some areas maybe that we do want to think about collectively, and we would love to be able to think about these with all of your heads and your ideas as well as ours. So we've got kind of three areas that we would love to have a kind of discussion around. One is what community resources do we have? You know, what's out there that is untapped at the moment that perhaps that we haven't thought about and we could use and could really help us around floods, around SuDS, around interventions. This could be funding, or it could just be a great idea for where a pond could go, or you know, a local landowner who wants to plant trees and we don't know about it yet. So what community resources are out there? What new interventions could be developed? And Juliet went through a kind of small list just then of the types of interventions that could happen, but that's not a complete list. And we've started to draw together a list, also with the help of the Usenaida River Trust, of potential projects around Hassocks, and we're very much interested also in going beyond the close kind of environ of Hassocks and into Hurst and other areas around Hassocks. So if there are other interventions, other projects that could work in the local area, let's have a discussion about them, and we'll put that into the mix. And then finally, what resources, what info, what do people need to undertake these interventions? So, you know, for example, we do have a step-by-step guide on the HKD website on how to make your own Rainbox planter. We've also got a great leaflet on flooding in Hassocks and how to slow the flow. But what else do people need? What do you feel like you guys need to undertake a project, or suggest something to us that collectively we can undertake? So community resources, interventions, what ideas for projects do we have, and what resources do we need? Those are things to chuck into the mix, but please go ahead. If you've written a question in the chat, unmute yourself at some point and please let us have your questions, and we'll do our best to try and answer them collectively. So, well, First things first, Lucy, just a quick question there that we can answer straight away is, will this talk be available to share after the event? And the answer is yes, we are recording it. Wivelsfield Parish Council are very interested in what's happened in Hassocks and wanted it recorded so that they could take a look. So yes, absolutely, it's shareable. We will make it available. So yes. Go for it, Rob. Yeah.
I've got a suggestion. I think that we could probably make use of the school communities. We have a thriving sort of community with the Hassocks Friends of Hassocks Infant School and the Friends of the Women's School, and maybe we could go and present to some of those. I don't know if they have meetings or whatever they have, or even distribute some of our material through those groups, because there's an awful lot of parents in the village who will obviously care about this sort of thing hugely, and they probably just are not aware it's going on. So I thought that might be quite a good community we could tap into.
And we have done a bit of that in the past, but it was about 3 years ago now that we created those Rainbox planters, and it was like pushing an open door, I have to say, in terms of the school's involvement, because we went to them and we said, look, we've got this idea, we'd love to help you, we've got the funding, we've got the manpower, and they were like, well, we never hear this kind of thing where, you know, it's all kind of ready and available, and the kids got involved and they helped to do the planting, and it was a really wonderful, you know, both the Hassocks Infants and the Downlands Rainbox making were an absolute joy, and the kids got involved and it was fantastic. But yes, absolutely, I think, you know, more you know, because it's also an education thing, isn't it? So if kids get involved and they know about you know, the biodiversity and the flood mitigation effects, and, you know, we can talk about climate change, we can talk about the water cycle, you know, it's a brilliant way to you know, tick lots of boxes at the same time. So yes, absolutely. Anybody else on those? Go for it, Jane.
Yeah, have you thought of approaching Hassocks U3A and asking them just to get my generation rather than the kids as well, because we tend to be the ones who own and determine what gets grown in gardens, and talking to them about, you know, what somebody, just a straightforward garden, can do to reduce surface runoff. Because even those of us who are not prone to flooding, we're almost at the top of the hill, so we're not prone to flooding. But what we do in our garden makes a difference. And I think it
really does, and it's a great suggestion. And we have talked about what people can do in terms of sustainable gardening and kind of mulching and water butts and that kind of thing, and that quite a lot of that information is in the leaflet that we produced as well. And Juliet, you might just want to talk to that point as well.
Yes, I think it would be really. Are you involved, Jane, in U3A?
I'm involved in the Lewis U3A.
Oh, but not the Hassocks one.
Not the Hassocks one, but they're pretty easy to get in touch with.
Yeah.
The U3A is very well organised.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and Lewis certainly do public lectures for all the membership, which are very well attended. I would imagine that Hassocks is probably doing the same thing.
Yes, I'm not sure because I haven't been involved, but I think it's a good idea, and we can certainly make contact and see what they might be interested in. I think you're right about you live on a hill, and so your garden doesn't get flooded, but what you do makes a difference to the people who live down the hill.
Yeah,
that's something I wouldn't have thought about 5 years ago, but I've now realized that if you want to prevent flooding, you actually have to work uphill a bit.
Yeah, and we all live in houses which have been built on drainage basins.
Yeah.
So every single one of us can make a difference.
Yeah.
To what's happening lower down in the village, or, you know, down the road, or whatever. I think gardening clubs might welcome speakers as well. I don't know if we haven't lived here very long. I don't know if Hassocks has a gardening club.
Yes,
that's the sort of thing that they would love, again, to have a speaker who could say to them, look, it really matters if you do this.
There's an interesting point from Judith. Judith, do you want to?
Hi, Juliet.
Hiking Mills.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things actually. Margaret and I were talking last year, and Margaret, I think, had an idea about open gardens and showing, you know, features that people have around. I know my husband's done quite a lot of work putting water butts in and irrigation into ours, but I'd like to see what people have done around, you know, planting for wet and dry periods as well. I thought that was a really good idea. I think people would be really up for that. And then secondly, I walk the dog a lot, and through the winter it's been so awfully muddy, but one of the places I think a friend and I have always sort of say it's got so much potential is just on there's some rough ground as you sort of walk north of Clayton Mills. And I think it's all been created from, you know, earth that was piled up when they were building the new houses. And it's just so wasted in terms of an open space. It could be absolutely lovely for wildlife. I'm sure people from the village would absolutely love it. In the winter, you get quite a lot of water and sort of a pond created just at the top. And I don't know whether that could be enhanced at all, but this friend and I sort of said as we've walked through there, if that were ever lost, I mean, there's massive amounts of water that would have to go somewhere. But to create something there around some sort of wildlife area would be just fantastic. And it does get very wet in the fields around there as well. So I don't know how much use it is for you know, sort of, I don't know, sheep or something, I suppose the farmer keeps there. So just,
are you thinking about if you're walking north from Clayton Mills, like towards the Woodside Kennels, it's the area to the right, there's a big
yes, it opens up to the right and the left, and you get these sort of mounds, and it's obviously all sort of rough ground that has just sort of been left. I think it would be great if it were sort of somehow sort of retained as open area. I don't know whether they're intending to build on it or not, but we could desperately do with some areas, sort of wildlife areas there. You know, there's lots of people who walk up there, and there's a little children's play area, but it could be absolutely lovely if it was sort of, yes, if a little bit more was done. So yes, just a thought on whether a pond would go in there.
Great, that's something for us to investigate. And also, I love your idea of the walking trail and the open gardens, because we actually had a plan that was sadly knocked on the head due to the COVID-19 lockdown, of doing a walking trail around the different SuDS and NFM interventions around Hassocks. So we were going to do a walking tour in May last year of all of the different things that had happened, you know, at Adastra, you know, the rain gardens, and looking at the Rainbox planters, and then going to Lagwood and Butcher's Wood and looking at the debris dams. But we also intended to stop off on the way at various people's gardens, and if people had green roofs or a particularly inventive water butt system or whatever, we wanted to see some brilliant kind of local community examples of rainwater harvesting. So if that's you, if you've got an ingenious water butt system, or if you've been mulching particularly well, or some way of kind of you know, storing water or something like that, let us know, because we would love after the lockdown has eased to carry on and do that walking trail. And it'd be great to, yeah, as you say, inspire people of what's possible in their own gardens. So absolutely.
That's a great idea, Alistair, to take in all these things that people wouldn't otherwise notice, I think. So yeah, it'd be good.
I think, John, you also had your hand up at one point. Do you still have a question? Oh, not John Willis, John Hinds.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, you need to unmute yourself. If anybody in the meantime has any other questions, I think I saw some. Yes, go for it.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find myself on the screen.
Oh, I see. No worries.
I've written a short note about fish. Would it be possible to introduce fish into the streams? Because I have in the 38 years I've lived in Ditchling, I have occasionally seen fish on the stream in the centre of Hassocks, you know, on
Yes.
Hills Bridge, and men older than me have sort of looked over the side of the bridge as well and said, "Oh yes, when I was a boy, we used to catch fish on the stream." I wonder whether it's
Well, yeah, we don't actually need to introduce them because they're there already, and actually, you know, most days through some of the spring and summer, you can actually see brown trout over the edge of Spitalfield Bridge, and the brown trout make their way all the way up into Lag Wood, and you can see them nestling under the banks of the herring stream up in Lag Wood. So they're absolutely about, and in some numbers as well. If you over the last summer, there was about 8 of them that were trapped because we had that very warm and dry spell, and there was a little section of the stream next to the Parklands Copse play area that they were kind of trapped in, and then they thankfully were freed again as soon as the next heavy rains came. But it just shows you, and they were quite decent sizes as well. So there's plenty of life in these streams, and of course, as downland chalk streams, they are some of the rarest and clearest and purest water in the world, if they weren't kind of treated as badly as we sadly do treat them. But yeah, there's plenty of life in there, and fish to be seen if you look carefully. So it's wonderful to suggest. Yes, go for it, Juliet.
One of our volunteer teams actually is monitoring aquatic life in the streams, but hasn't been able to do that for the last year. But until the beginning of COVID-19, we were doing quarterly monitoring of stream life at 2 locations in the village, mostly looking at invertebrates, looking at lots of larvae of caddisflies and mosquitoes and black flies and all sorts of things. And it is amazing for somebody like me who's got no background in biology and last did biology when I was 16, which is a very long time ago, to look at what appears to be a bucket of slightly muddy water and put it out on trays and start looking under a microscope. It's amazing what's there. And so it's been pretty exciting to do that, and real shame that we haven't been able to continue.
But again, if anybody is particularly interested in aquatic invertebrates or water quality testing, it's called BMWP sampling, you know, looking at what the different interesting bugs are in the water. There is this group that will meet again, no doubt, as lockdown eases. So if you're interested in this, get in touch and we can put you in touch with the group, and Juliet is part of that group. So please do get involved in that. Do we have any other burning questions or any thoughts on, you know, what community resources are, where potential interventions could be? One thing that Juliet, Rob and I have been doing is poring over maps of Hassocks and the surrounding area, looking at where all the small streams start, and you know, where there are potential interventions, and we'd really love to get some feedback on that at some point. That may be the next presentation that we do, or an open day, or something where we can start to get some community feedback on potentially where the next interventions are. But if you do have suggestions, please do send them our way.
Alistair, Fred Maladay was waving, and also I see Gordon Knott has got a hand up. You know,
Great stuff. Thank you. Fred, go for it.
Thanks, Alistair. Can I take advantage of Sue and Bill Hatton being here and their immense experience of local and district council activities? Because my big disappointment in the last couple of years has been the number of people concreting over their front gardens. Now, I'm led to believe that isn't legal, and yet it would appear that everyone gets away with it. Now, am I being misled? What is the reality about that sort of situation? Could Bill or Sue sort of enlighten us if possible?
Yeah, I think you probably being misled. It's always been a very tricky area, sort of cementing over front gardens. It looks terrible. People do it, and technically, I reckon that it's development and can be argued to require planning permission, but it's a bit like tall television aerials or something. They technically require it or used to as well. But there was so much of it that councils basically turned a blind eye. So I certainly agree this is something that should be really pushed, because it's a very serious thing. And it's happening more and more. You can see that all over the place. So yeah, I think that it's something we could take up and follow. But I think expecting sort of planning enforcement officers to rush in and solve the problem for you is probably a bit too optimistic.
That's very helpful. If I could just add, Alice, there that I said just concreting over gardens. I really should have said all the new extensions that are going up, including concreting the front garden, which is subtly different. That might give a rather stronger lead on the legal side to insist or try to insist something is actually done. Also, I mean, we have examples in the village of people even going a step further. Not only do they concrete their front garden, they fill the drain that was put in with concrete a few weeks after it's signed off.
Yeah,
horrifying.
Yeah, and that obviously is a massive problem, because then we get, you know, the surface water issue, which then becomes the stream flooding issue. So you're absolutely right to raise that, Fred. Thank you, and thank you for the response, Bill. Can we go to Gordon then, if he had his hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. I just want to say, you know, I was going to agree with you pushing at the open door with the schools, because you've got, you know, over 1,000 children and young people being schooled in the village. You've also got schools in Ditchling and Hurstby Point. There's so many ways into schools. You know, the forest schools are pretty active at the moment. Plus, you know, there's loads of bored and disenfranchised young people around at the moment looking for stuff like this to happen. So I realise it's a capacity issue, isn't it? And having someone to kind of lead on this or has got the time to do it. And that was my wider question was, you know, in this room tonight, you've got a core group of interested, motivated individuals who are here because they're really interested in the issue. How do you get the message out to the wider community and get them involved? And I know you've got leaflets and the website and all the rest of it, but it's the ongoing issue, isn't it, about how do you involve the wider community?
Yeah, it's a good point. And one of the things that we've been thinking of, and actually we've been working with Lucy Bennett, who's also on this call, is around a series of videos, short videos that kind of explain what the problem is and then what some of the solutions are, and that they can be very kind of readily digested and hopefully will reach a wider audience. So we're planning a whole series in the next year or so of little videos which explain some of these issues that we've been delving into tonight, and then tries to look at some of the solutions. So definitely in terms of kind of outreach, we're going to attempt that, and we will do our best to get the message out there. But you're absolutely right, and I love the idea of a kind of a core team of young people who are happy to help. And if as Juliet mentioned earlier about the Rainbox planters, you know, if we had a team of young people who were, if we gave them the materials, they would be happy to go round to your house and build you a fantastic Rainbox planter in an afternoon. And if that could almost be a kind of a community resource on tap, I mean, how fantastic is that? And, you know, as these start spreading through the community, that's liters and meters squared of water that's not, you know, flooding straight into the stream. So that would be definitely something to aim for.
Alistair?
Yes, Rob, go for it.
I was thinking we've also got some quite close relationships with the Hassocks market, and maybe we could have a bit more of a presence there. Hopefully those will start being a bit more accessible to people, but you definitely have a wonderful community spirit at those events. You know, hopefully things like Light Up Hassocks will happen again, and maybe we can sort of be there and a bit more vocal there as well.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we have had stalls there a number of times in the past, and we had, of course, our annual seed swap, which unfortunately again COVID has put paid to this year. But yes, it's a good idea of getting the word out into the local community. So that's definitely something that we will put on our list for when we can again. Thank you. Yes, go for it.
Yeah.
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 Yes, Paul, I see Paul's here tonight, Paul Brown. Maybe at district council level, we can perhaps have a little bit of influence when planning applications come in for and ask about what they're going to do for new houses. I'm talking about now, what they're going to do about driveways and that sort of thing. I mean, it'll be a very small process, but we could start, couldn't we, Paul, and perhaps, you know, do a bit more digging like we do anyway about these sort of things. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, there's always calling for planning permission afterwards if people are doing the wrong thing. You know, set an example. In terms of, you know, impervious driveways and that kind of thing. But the district plan DP 41 is a bit weak. That's really the problem, isn't it? So what I would say to everybody is do read the district plan DP 41, which is flood risk and drainage, particularly in relation to new developments, you know, the big developments, because it actually only applies to 10 or more houses. Just one other thing I found recently, I've had two in my ward where the developer hasn't done what was on the in the plans, and the officers are very reluctant to follow it up. So that's another area. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, Roy and Pat.
Yeah, thinking of planning, most houses have very small garages. They're not big enough to put modern cars in. So they end up as storerooms and cars are parked on the drive. And usually they have a second car, so that ends up being the concreted front garden. So really garages ought to be bigger.
Or cars should be smaller.
Or cars should, or yeah, get rid of the second car and put a green roof on that garage.
And there is one more thing that I organise speakers for the Hassocks Horticultural Society. So if you want to come and talk to us about rain gardens and how we should be gardening better, more than happy to arrange someone to come. So
that's great. That's fantastic. Do we have your contact information, Pat?
I don't know. Yes, you have, because we get the emails from Astrid.
Okay, super. So Juliet, have you made a note? Super. You have ideas, questions? If not, then I think we can probably wrap up. Juliet, do you have any final thoughts?
I'm just looking at the last of the last comments and questions.
Okay.
Yeah, so Lucy's talking about a new head at the primary school in Hurst who's very open to sustainability kinds of things. So that'd be great. Yeah, we can certainly share ideas.
Well, if in the coming weeks and months you have any ideas about, you know, where we could put a pond, a balancing pond, or you hear of a landowner who is very interested in planting trees or anything along those lines, or you yourself would like to do something in your garden along the lines that we've already discussed, then please do get in touch with the Floods and SuDS team. I will pass over to Juliet for any final words.
Yes, I think you can contact us via the HKD Transition website, hkdtransition.org.uk, or send an email to info@hkdtransition.org.uk. I'm sure you can track us down. You can Google us if you can't remember any of those. And we would very much like to hear from you. Any ideas that pop into your head, just send us an email. And if you'd like to get more involved yourself in thinking about what could happen and how to make things happen, we'd welcome that even more than your ideas.
And if you want to join the team, please chuck your hat into the ring. We could always use more ideas and more women and manpower. So please do.
We are a very small group. There are 4 of us, so there's a limit to what 4 people can do. So join us if you can. And thank you for joining us tonight. And
yes, brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.